So welcome everybody to the Festival of Discovery and to this loneliness panel. So really looking at loneliness in the 21st century. And we today want to look at how we live with loneliness and what that means. And when we talk about loneliness, for us, it is that natural, internal warning system, alarm, emotion that reminds us that we need other people. We need company. For us here in this room, there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed and no stigma about experiencing loneliness. I myself have experienced it many times, and I'm sure most of us here have. What we want to recognise is that it is an ordinary emotion that we all will experience at some time in our lives, and that in order to address it, live with it, cope with it, and hopefully reduce it, then we need at first to understand it and accept it. I have an amazing panel for you today. I'm just going to ask them all briefly to say hello and introduce themselves, because they'll do it much better than I ever could. And then we will hear from each of them for about 10 minutes about their experience, their knowledge, their expertise within this subject. And then there'll be time for questions. So if you have a question for any panel member, pop it in the chat. Do talk to each other in the chat. And if you have a question, pop the word question first. And then if the chat gets lively, we can find it. Is that okay with everybody? I'm going to ask Katie, Noreena, Claire and Josie to introduce themselves. May I suggest you put it on speaker view for this session so that you can see the person speaking. Noreena, would you like to let the world know who you are if they don't already?
Hi, well, firstly, it's so nice to see all these different people, because one of the things I'm really missing at the moment is seeing lots of people. So I'm delighted to be doing this. My name's Noreena Hertz. I am a professor, I'm an economist, I am an author, and I'm a broadcaster, and I've just written a book, The Lonely Century, Coming Together in a World That's Pulling Apart.
Thank you, Noreena. Claire, Josie, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Claire. I've been working on the Lonely Not Alone campaign for 2 years now. I absolutely love the work that I do and just getting involved and having conversations like this about topics that we're interested in.
Yeah, and I'm pretty much the same, but I've only been on the panel for just this year. So at the start of this year, joining the Lonely Not Alone campaign. And yeah, looking forward to discussing everything that we've been doing recently and looking forward to hearing some of your views about it as well.
And finally, Kate.
So hi, I'm Kate Shurety. This is the most people I've seen in 9 months. It's really quite incredible. So many faces. I'm from the Campaign to End Loneliness, and as the name suggests, we are an organisation that campaigns on the issue of loneliness, working with other organisations, and we also have a public-facing campaign called Be More Us, which promotes different ways in which everybody can connect with other people in really small ways that make a big difference.
Thank you. So these are some amazing women you're going to hear from today. So we've got a lovely treat for you in store. So I would like to welcome and ask Noreena if you can kick us off with our Living with Loneliness today, 21st century.
When I think about what I have missed most in recent weeks and months, it hasn't been clothes shopping or traveling or getting my hair done, not that there weren't times during the last lockdown that it desperately needed doing. It's been something much more fundamental. Hugs from friends, chats at my local cafe, smiles from passers-by, that empathetic glance from a fellow gym goer at that point we've both been feeling burn. As humans, our need to connect with others is hardwired, originating in our deep evolutionary past. We are what we might think of as creatures of togetherness, and being connected to others is our natural and in fact desired state, whether this desire is conscious or not, which is why feeling disconnected from others feels so awful, for it's a sensation our bodies have been primed to react strongly against. You see, when we're lonely, our blood pressure, cortisol levels, and cholesterol all rise steeply. The part of our brain responsible for fight or flight, our amygdala, goes into a state of high alert, a smart short-term response for sure, reminding us clearly of the importance of reconnecting to others, but a response that when protracted, like keeping a car in first gear over the course of a journey, or even worse, during repeated journeys, isn't good for us, physically as well as mentally, and helps explain why loneliness increases our risk of heart disease, decreases our life expectancy, and is as bad for us as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, with even relatively short periods of isolation capable of having a very negative impact on our health. Now, what's important to acknowledge is that whilst recent weeks and months have made many of us feel more isolated, even before terms like social distancing had entered our vocabulary and our smiles were occluded by masks, this already was the lonely century, a world in which we felt ever more distant from each other and ever more apart, a world in which 4 in 10 under 25s say that they often or always feel lonely. 2 in 5 pensioners admit that their main form of company is their television or pet. Almost half of those who work in offices don't have a single friend at their job. And 85% of employees feel disconnected from their company and their work. Even before the coronavirus struck, we'd been for already some time in the midst of a global loneliness crisis, a crisis affecting us all, young, old, male, female, single, married, rich and poor. In fact, as I crisscrossed the globe researching my new book, The Lonely Century, one of the things that struck me was how huge the range of people profoundly affected by feelings of isolation and disconnection was. Whether I'm talking Saito-san, the Tokyo pensioner who chose a life of crime in order to find company, Hashim, the London Uber driver who, despite being with passengers all day long, feels desperately lonely because he's scared to speak to them in case he's rated badly as a result. Eric, the Parisian baker, finding community in France's far right, or Peter, the 4'0" London schoolboy, distraught because no one likes his Instagram posts, or Carl, the Los Angeles media executive, so lonely he pays to be cuddled. These may be extreme cases, but loneliness has been on the rise throughout this century and across the world. And there are many reasons why this is so. The unprecedented pace of contemporary life, cities increasingly designed for profit, not people, an ever more feral workplace, open plan offices, the rise in numbers of people who live on their own. These are just some of the contributory factors. Did you know that not only is civility lower in cities, but also that the more densely populated a city, the less civil it is? Or that in open plan offices, people are more likely to communicate by email or text than talk to each other face to face? Then there are, of course, the choices politicians have made. Think, for example, of how ever since the 2008 financial crisis, places where people can come together, libraries, parks, youth clubs, community centres, have been starved of funds. 130 libraries were shut down in the UK last year alone. Community needs an infrastructure, physical spaces where people of all kinds can interact with each other, unite. We'll never be able to find common ground if there is no ground that we all share. And then, of course, there's this device, the weapon of mass distraction that fragments our attention, making the world for many a meaner, crueler place. which is also radically changing how it is we interact. There was fascinating research done in America which found that people smile significantly less at each other when they have their smartphones with them, just with them, not necessarily turned on. And even having spent a number of years researching today's teenagers, I have to admit to being pretty shocked when I discovered that one of America's most prestigious Ivy League universities has started to run how to read a face in real life classes for its incoming students, in which they are taught if someone smiles in a meeting, that's a good sign. If they frown, that's bad, because so many of their incoming students, having spent so much time on their phones, were incapable of communicating effectively in person. Big tech, big corporations, and governments clearly have much to answer for, and there are tangible steps they must take if we are to be able to reconnect. I hope we will have a chance to discuss these in the discussion period. But there is also much we can do, because society is not only done to us, we do society too. So if we are to stem the loneliness crisis and rebuild community, we will need to actively tend it. Each of us needs to take responsibility for the kind of world in which we want to live, whilst recognizing that the cards we have been dealt, economically and socially, may well impact the extent to which we are able to do so. Some of this is about taking small steps that may not seem much at first, but over time will accrue meaningful impact. Things like putting our phones away and being more present with our partners and families. Asking a work colleague who always eats their lunch alone al desco whether they want to join us for lunch. Smiling at those who pass by us as we walk in the park, or if we've got masks on, consciously nodding or waving, explicitly recognizing a colleague's helpfulness or kindness. Other steps will demand more of us, whether it's campaigning for a political candidate who speaks to cohesion, not division, standing in solidarity with a group that's being unfairly demonized or discriminated against, boycotting a brand because we've discovered it's treating its workers badly, or weaning ourselves off these digital transactions we've all found so convenient during lockdown, committing instead to buy more at our local shops and support the business owners who serve and anchor our communities. More generally, it's a shift in mindset that's needed. We need to recast ourselves from consumers to citizens, from takers to givers, from casual observers to active participants. This is about taking opportunities to exercise our listening skills, whether in the context of work, our family lives, or in our friendships. It's about accepting that sometimes what's best for the collective is not what's in our immediate self-interests. It's about actively practicing empathy, something in the cut and thrust of daily life we can easily forget to do. And while some may decry calls for a greater focus on softer values, we also need to commit to consideration for others being our lodestar, drawing inspiration from the selfless acts of so many people across the globe that we witnessed during the heights of the pandemic, whether we're talking about the West Midlands volunteer who searched high and low during lockdown until he found a shop selling milk in glass bottles in order to support a blind man who needed them to tell the difference between different liquids in his fridge. The Italian university students who left a note in the stairwell of an apartment block in the southern city of Bari, offering to help the building's elderly or vulnerable residents with grocery shopping. Or Arkansas teenager Bill, who poignantly wrote that although he hadn't been able to do too many things for people during lockdown, he had been trying to make an effort to talk to people he doesn't normally talk with, just offering a fun conversation to distract them from the world, which speaks to something each of us can do, something we can do right now. Think about whether there's someone in our own network who might be lonely and consciously reach out to them. If we can, arrange to meet up with them in a socially distanced, safe way, or otherwise pick up the phone and give them a call. Just showing someone we're thinking about them, that they're visible to us, can make a huge difference to someone who's feeling lonely themselves. Kindness matters. Feeling heard and seen matters. Feeling connected to others matters. And although this right now is the lonely century, it doesn't have to remain so. Change is possible as long as the will is there, individually and collectively. The future is in all of our hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noreena. I certainly could not have said that to myself. And I think people will probably tire of me now saying we will never find common ground unless we have ground in common, especially as I've always looked at loneliness from a place perspective. So for me, a lot of what you said echoed. Thank you so much for the so many different examples you gave. Thank you. If you've got a question for Noreena, please do pop it in the chat and we will hear from her again in a little while. I'm now going to hand over to Claire first, and then followed by Josie. So Claire, would you like to talk to us about your experience and the work that you do around loneliness?
Hello, everyone. Just as a reminder, I am from the Lonely Not Alone campaign. I think the reason why I felt so inclined to get involved with the campaign, even way before it was even a concept, was because I had experienced many forms of loneliness throughout my life, and I've had so many conversations with close friends about the way that loneliness has affected us, but we've never really found ways to alleviate the pain. And I thought that it would be a great opportunity for me to speak to other people about how they deal with loneliness and how their experiences are similar and different to mine. I am Zimbabwean. I was born in England. So with that, that's meant that I don't have any family in this country. Everyone is scattered across the world. So I have always seen family members through a screen and using various different social media sites. And whilst that has always been amazing and great to be able to stay connected and be resourceful, it has also shown me how my identity and discovering my identity has been very important and integral to my journey throughout life. I've always been on an edge and on my way to discover I'm as a young Black woman living in my identity for quite a long time was one of the reasons why I was feeling lonely. Being in a country where I barely ever saw people who looked like me, media representation has always been very low. And if Black people were represented, it was always very derogatory or very stereotypical versions of Black people were shown. And for me, that made it harder for me to discover who I was and go back to my heritage and culture. And because the culture at home was very different to everything that was going on when I stepped outside, I was very confused about which parts I should embrace more. And there was always a conflict going on in my mind. I think this struggle, this fight for my identity is an experience that I've realized is not just my own. A lot of people who are children of immigrants have told me that they experience the same thing. And whilst I may not have the key to not feeling that way anymore, I have found solstice in having conversations with others and relating to other people and sharing my experiences, because it eases the pain and it when you get to share someone else's load, it makes it easier for everyone in the community. Another way that I felt lonely was at home. I am an only child, and what that's meant is I've always been quite independent, and independence is a good thing, definitely, but it is a double-edged sword. For a long time, I tried to do everything by myself, and I wouldn't ask for help, and even if I needed to. And I don't think it was something that I was doing consciously, but it was a personality trait that I was embracing even when I shouldn't. Through working on the Lonely Not Alone campaign, I've really learned how important it is for young people to collaborate and to ask for help and to know that it is okay. And I've always known that my friends are like my family, and working on the campaign with friends that I knew before the campaign really helped as well. It meant that we got to start conversations about youth loneliness within our friendship groups, and it really started to open doors for people. And I'm happy to say that a lot of people have told me how Lonely Not Alone has affected them in a positive way. I would like to talk to you more about Lonely Not Alone. It is an incredible campaign that has not just changed the lives of the people who have interacted, but has changed the lives of the people who co-designed it. I know when I first started 2 years ago, we've got a very vague but open brief. And what that meant was we were really able to mold and shape the campaign into whatever we wanted. And I was very happy about that, because it meant that we were really able to define what loneliness was to us as a group, and then tackle and then go about going and making a campaign. I think it has been incredible to see the way that the co-designers have grown throughout these 2 years of making the campaign. Josie, it has been great to get to know you and share experiences. I think when we get to work on a campaign and have a shared goal, it is so incredible, because you get to understand people in a way that is new and different to when you just meet someone in the street. Especially in lockdown, I found working on the campaign to be something that really kept me going and kept me busy when I know I needed to feel like I had some purpose. And even though we weren't able to make the campaign in person, I was so happy to see how there really wasn't any difference between the first year and the second. In fact, we were so resourceful and managed our time so well that nobody would have been able to tell. And having our Lonely Not Alone family grow so much within the span of the lockdown, it really showed how important it is to be resourceful and to use the devices at any means possible to connect with people. And for sure, I definitely agree that it is important to have a person-to-person interactions, but it has not been possible, and we need to use whatever means necessary to make sure that we're having those social interactions. Right now we're all able to connect over Zoom, and I think that's a beautiful and wonderful thing. And I think more people need to embrace social media, as long as it is in a way that is safe and welcoming and comforting, because that's the only way that I've been able to connect with my family for years. And I have I can't imagine how I would have been able to grow and learn more about my culture if I didn't have social media. Now I'm going to pass it to the amazing Josie, and she's going to talk more about her experiences too.
Thank you very much, Claire. So yeah, I'm Josie. Like I mentioned before, I've only been involved with the project over the last year. My personal experiences with loneliness are that, for me personally, it started at a very young age. So I was diagnosed with chronic health conditions at age 3. And I suppose right from starting primary school, it's kind of put that edge on things, making it difficult to connect with people, because personally, it's not something that you can just forget. When you have a health condition, it's always there in the back of your mind. And for me, I had to have like just different changes within my own personal life across the whole day, basically. So it meant more attention from the teachers, like with the medications that I was taking, making sure that that was always administered properly. And so obviously it kind of set you apart from the rest of your peers. And that kind of grew with me, I suppose. So I think the most important thing to note is that loneliness can affect any and every single area of your life. So whether it's school, whether it's connecting with people, or whether it's even in the workplace, I think the most like detrimental thing about it is how it affects your self-confidence and your self-belief. And like that's been something that, through talking to people on the Lonely Not Alone campaign, it's definitely seemed to be a common theme. And just in my own personal view, when that affects you to that degree, it makes it much more difficult to really push yourself to connect. So, for example, I work in social media and I'm on it all day, every day, pretty much. But it can be one of those things where it's like you can tick off things, but when it's actual personal connections to other people, it seems like it is that barrier that it makes it so much harder to connect, because it's you sort of don't know how to respond to it. Like it can seem so daunting at times, and whilst social media is a fantastic thing, it's like sometimes I think the loneliness just gets to you. And it just puts that fear in the back of your mind, I suppose, of how am I going to connect to this person? What is there to say? How do I respond? And then it's like, but really, should you voice your concerns? Shouldn't you? Are there things that perhaps may be more appropriate for the situation, even if that's not really how you're feeling like? And it can be really, really sort of scary, I suppose. But with working on the Lonely Not Alone campaign, for me personally, I've found it's been so incredible. Like, honestly, it's been a bit strange working completely online for it, admittedly, but it's just through connecting with other people with the common goal, we've all gone from being complete strangers, or some of us, like the newcomers to the group, to saying I would consider people like Claire and the rest of the group true friends, because we have that connection. We've been able to talk, and I think it's just such an unusual time to be living in, where connection is difficult, but with the creativity, the fun, and to be honest, some of the just completely bizarre ideas that we've had, it's been a barrel of laughs right from the start. And I think in a way, one of the things that could be so beneficial to people, young people in particular, is through getting involved with more campaigns like this. There have been times for me personally where it's been difficult, where it's been a challenge, But I think that's part of difficulty in overcoming the loneliness. It's always been such a difficult challenge to put yourself through. Like, I think with anything, if it challenges you, it's going to be difficult, but the end results will be worth it. And it's just been about that personal growth for all of us as a team, and then just creating something beautiful that hopefully will inspire change to come about with the campaign. But yeah, thank you.
That's incredible, Josie and Claire. Thank you. I'm getting quite emotional here, listening to your personal experiences and being reminded of my own as well. I think that whole sense about actually relationships take time, don't they? And something to bind you, whether that be on or offline. How lucky you are that you've been able to be involved in a project. To start with, you've been open and honest about how you feel, and actually been able to travel together to create something. I think having a purpose, having some allies, you know, and being able to be honest are probably some of the cornerstones of starting to think about loneliness. Honestly, I couldn't have said that better myself. I'm sorry, you've aced me out of the park there. But I think it's so important that we're able to share our personal stories, because that does give people permission to share theirs. So I fully respect and thank you for that. And once again, we'll be coming back to Josie and Claire later. And now I'm going to hand over to my good friend. We've been in this game a long time. So I'd like to hand over to Kate to talk about the campaign to end loneliness, Be More Us, loneliness, and what we can all do about it. Kate.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. And it's a tough one to follow actually. Noreena, Claire, and Josie, you've been absolutely amazing. And like you, Tracey, I think I'm really moved by the honesty and the and the bravery actually for Claire and Josie, just to sort of give testimony to your own experience of loneliness. And in a sense, that's a really good place to start. Loneliness, as we've talked about, is that subjective feeling when you haven't got the right kind of relationships, not the right number of them or the right quality in your life, and there's a mismatch between what you want and what you've got, and that's an incredibly painful feeling. But it's also, as Tracey said right at the very beginning, it's a universal one. It is part of our human condition. Part of being hardwired for connection means that when we don't have that feeling of connection, we have that sense of pain and that sense of disconnect. And in itself, it's not a bad thing. It's something that should help prompt us to reconnect with people, to remind ourselves that we need other people around us, and to reach out. But as Noreena has already alluded to as well, if that is prolonged, if we're lonely for a very, very long time, that can become really, really damaging to our health, and it can become even more difficult to overcome. So the downward spiral that I've seen being mentioned on the chat already, that sense of, you know, if you're feeling lonely and disconnected, you find it harder and less motivated to actually reconnect with people. You might withdraw more socially and become more inward looking, and so that stepping outside becomes even harder to do and requires even more courage. So collectively, we all really need to understand where we are, I guess, in terms of our own individual social needs, and that's going to be different for every single person. So I guess the kind of things that will make me feel lonely, or my tolerance to how much social interaction I might need, will be very different from anyone else in this Zoom room at the moment. But if we can understand that a little bit more about our own selves, we can take action earlier, potentially to reconnect with other people as well. I think the other thing that I'd like to mention really as well is just what a huge difference this year has made in terms of the COVID and the pandemic. We've always known and understood that transitions and loss in particular trigger feelings of loneliness and can put people in that downward spiral. And it's been a year of loss for almost everybody. We've all lost a sense of normality and what our normal lives would be like. We've lost things that we thought we didn't like our daily commutes and things like that as well. And people have been ill, and people have been bereaved, and people have been, have lost their job and their income and their role as well. So COVID has come with an awful lot of loss, and that loss has triggered, I think, a really huge amount of experience and understanding about loneliness and how that impacts on us all individually. So I think events like this are really important because they bring us together to actually consider that and to listen to each other and our own experience around that. But I think there's no underestimating just the impact that that's had. Some of the things that we've been looking at the campaign to end loneliness in the last year have been around the psychology of loneliness, like individually what that means and what that feels like. So those individual triggers and the different ways of thinking that you can get into in terms of feeling lonely. So I've mentioned already, loneliness is very subjective, it's very individual, it's also very complex. We sometimes describe it as an emotional cluster. It's not one single emotion. It comes and hits us in lots of different ways. And sometimes we might not recognize it as loneliness. So, different people will express their feelings of loneliness in different ways, such as, you might feel abandoned, they might feel helpless, you might feel invisible. Feeling invisible or unheard is another very common way of describing it. And there may be other aspects to that as well. You might feel resentful of other people or envious. One of my personal warning signs in terms of when I know that I'm feeling on the verge of feeling lonely will be I'll often feel a bit bored and a little bit undirected. And that's usually because I haven't had enough social stimulation from the people that I really love and trust. So that always sort of tells me that I need to reach out a bit. But that emotional cluster is very different and very unique for each individual. I think that kind of sense of what is it that we all want individually is really important. That sense of your own awareness of what you need and the actions that you can take is also really important. The way that we think about social relations in our own life can also colour how you expect those sort of social events to also take place as well. So if you're feeling disconnected, if you're feeling upset or hurt, and there's a social engagement coming up, you're more likely to go into that expecting rejection, expecting to feel hurt. And if you're feeling that, that will also be picked up by other people, and you're more likely to come out of that feeling like, why did I bother? So there's that sort of understanding that kind of downward spiral, that vicious circle, and how you can actually start turning that round. The work that we've done at the campaign have shown, a few areas of psychological practice, which are all quite well talked about at the moment in terms of how you can sort of try and turn that around, but also the different kinds of techniques that people can use to turn that downward spiral into an upward spiral that actually is more and more positive. So things like positive psychology approaches, gratitude practices, or kind of techniques for mindfulness, where you try and listen to your thoughts, observe your thoughts, and not get wrapped up into them. Don't let the thought or the feeling become the thing itself. And that level of awareness can actually help create a little bit of distance from the emotions themselves, and actually start allowing you to sort of shift that perception. So I think, that's a lot of sort of psychological talk, but I think basically there's a lot around this, which is about self-compassion, understanding yourself as much as possible, but also being aware of the people around you, who has got family and friends around them, who hasn't, who might very well appreciate someone just knocking on the door and seeing how they are at the moment. Those sorts of just reaching out within your own community, and looking for the value in other people as well. So again, loneliness isn't countered by necessarily people doing great things to other people because that makes you feel better, but actually trying to understand what is reciprocal, what is the give and take in any relationship. That's really, really important to kind of focus on.
I'm muted. Sorry, Kate. I was saying thank you so much. That's fabulous. I think someone was making a cup of tea in the background. I think they're now getting told off. Thank you. No, that's okay. We could hear you clearly. We could just hear a very nice cup of tea being made, I think. So I hope one's coming your way. I think it is so important to be able to recognize. I mean, I think it was before when someone said about being able to name loneliness is really important. To be able to recognize when you might go in that way is really important. I know for me, I've heard a few people call it like a chasm of despair, and you get sucked in. Personally, I feel that I would fizzle away to nothing. So if nobody was there and I had no one to interact with, and I became no one. It was very interesting. Someone said busy people can be lonely. I would say busy people are often probably the most loneliest. But we have to acknowledge that busy people can be lonely too. I think it's really important, thank you, Kate, that we understand the psychology of what makes us be lonely, so that we can recognise it is part of us, and actually it is connection and those sort of things that we need to understand in order to sort of overcome periods of loneliness. So I think what we'll do now, we have lots of questions. Some have been answered by some of our panel members. But I will go right back to the beginning. So I think if I can find it, this question came via email, also has come to the panel. So there's a question around people who experience disabilities and the fact that they're more likely to be in poverty, less likely to be employed, and crucially are quite digitally excluded. So there's a few questions about, this is great for us who have access to the digital world, but what about those people who don't have access to digital technology? So what ideas do you have that we could do to help address the social isolation that people with disabilities feel, and especially that in the given circumstances they've probably felt them more acutely, what with the pandemic? Anybody have any thoughts? Noreena?
Yeah, I mean, I think even though you're absolutely right, and as we've all said, anyone can be lonely, rich, poor, male, female, young, old. There is a lot of research to show that people on lower income, people who are unemployed, are more likely to be lonely. And I haven't seen specific research on disability, but, you know, of course, if you're unable to go somewhere, if you don't have access to a laptop or a screen, if there are no bus routes, if your local bus routes have been cut, so you can't physically go somewhere, if there is no community centre to spend time in, if there is no public library where you can use technology, you are going to feel more lonely. So I think part of the fixes are structural, and that's really important to recognize that even though there is so much we can do to help each other, there is a lot that government needs to do, whether it's about, you know, making sure that everyone has got access to the technologies, but also to the physical spaces that we can come together. We don't want community to become something that's so expensive that only the rich have access to it.
Very good point. Kate?
Absolutely, in terms of the role of government and other organisations as well. I mean, and I think we've seen this around public space in particular, where public space has increasingly become more and more private. And just basic things like public toilets, public benches, places where people can sit and rest or relieve themselves. Them not being in the public space makes it harder and harder for different people to access them. And I think that's something we all need to fight for.
Yeah, I think that goes back, if there's no if there's no ground in common, there's no common ground. So I will be getting that one out regular, I think. There's been a really interesting question around introverts and extroverts. So do you think introverts experience it differently from extroverts? And are those differences being recognised? Has anybody got any thoughts on? I have to say, I don't myself, Claire.
For quite a long time, I think I had subscribed to a definition of introverted and extroverted that is not always necessarily true. The definition I like the most is, excuse my explanation, introverts are people who, I guess, have more energy, or I guess replenish their energy when they're alone or in their own space, in their own bubble, whereas extroverts replenish their energy when they're around others. And I think that is a better explanation of those two words, because a lot of the time people expect introverts to be shy or reclusive, when really that's not the case. A lot of the time introverts are very loud and bubbly with the people that they're close to. And the same thing for extroverts, actually. Extroverts can be the most shy people, but they might just like being around people. And I think it is, it's not fair to say that some extroverts will feel less lonely than introverts, because the way that those two terms manifest themselves is very different for different people.
That's such an incredible definition. I love that. Thank you, Claire. And that's one I'll be rolling out again as well. As a well-known extrovert, I do get my energy from others. So yeah, that's a really nice way of looking at it. Noreena, did you want to say something about that?
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry, your line popped up around your screen, so I thought you did. We have another question, which is about our society being more individualistic than a collective, and how that creates loneliness. So how can we create, we've all talked about this connection, this trying to bring people together, being open and honest. How do we create a great shift to collectiveness rather than this focus on individual nuclear family, if they've got one, as the only thing that's important? I remember, just to add, when I did Favorite Approaches to Loneliness, that someone spoke about their living in a box theory, which is they went to work in a box, they worked in a box, they drove home in a box, and then lived in a box and never saw anybody else. And I think it is that people's networks reduce and they focus just on their sort of immediate household. How can we create a more collective society?
Well, first, there is considerable research that shows that more individualistic societies are more prone to loneliness than more collectivist ones. And really what we've seen is, since the 1980s, as I'm sure most of the people on this call know, we have become, as societies, increasingly individualistic under a particular form of capitalism, neoliberalism, that really kind of put the individual at the center, and selfishness and self-interest valorize these qualities. And we even see this in pop song lyrics, which since the 1980s, words like I, we, our, and us were steadily supplanted by me, my, and I, which I find fascinating. But when it comes to how do we come together, what are the things that we can do? Well, one of the things that I think has been really undervalued in recent years has been kindness as a quality. And, at a government level, this is about valuing kindness and care more explicitly and paying carers more, not just clapping for carers. But also it's us valuing kindness more, I think, in each other, in our friends, in our partners, in our colleagues. I think something that Claire was talking about, and Josie as well, doing things with other people. Like it really came out from what both you were saying, about what both of you were saying about the campaign. Doing things with other people is a real way to feel connected to others. And you know, there are kind of wonderful initiatives, campaigns. In Bristol, there's a lovely campaign initiative, 91 Ways, where people of all different ethnicities and backgrounds come and cook together and share their heritages and their cultures through food. So lots of ways that we can do things together, because by doing things with people, especially people who are different to us, not only do we come together, but we practice the real foundations of inclusive democracy. Kind of, we learn how to respect people with different points of view. We learn how to disagree even nicely. We learn how to give as well as take. And these are really important skills if as a society we can come together again.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, I think again, this idea of mutuality and reciprocity, it's not, you know, you don't just do something out of charity or out of straight altruism. There is always a give and take in that. And I think that's part of the social glue that binds us together. And I think that's one of the things that's been quite heartening about the COVID experience for all of us, is we saw just how quickly those mutual aid groups, and they were called mutual aid. This isn't about me helping you. This is about how can we help each other, is really important. And I think it's nice to see that. And Noreena, I think your point on language is really, really interesting. Whether we see that shift in language where we're talking about what can we do together, and how can we help each other become more prevalent, would be really interesting to see.
I think it's also really interesting that during the pandemic as well, we have seen some people who have experienced loneliness prior to the pandemic, but actually now have a sense of community because their neighbours are not going out to work, and that people are actually taking the time and effort to talk to them and get their shopping. The opposite is also true, and I can come to that. But actually, these people now are becoming quite fretful and anxious about the world moving on again. So I'm worried that they'll become lonely once more when people go back to work and they don't see them. And what do we think we can do for those people who have found a sense of community and connection during the crisis, are really, really concerned that they might lose it once again?
I think this speaks to the bigger point about, and I think it's something many of us have really realized, if we hadn't already realized, the importance of strengthening our local neighborhoods and our local communities, because those little micro exchanges we have, the hello, how are you at the butcher's, the chat at our local bookshop if we're lucky to have one, the just 30-second exchange at a cafe, those micro interactions really help us feel much more connected to each other. And so I think really supporting our local communities, buying in our local shops, you know, showing up at community events if we have them, initiating community events. And again, at a structural level, you know, government needs to do a lot more, especially now, to help local shops who are going to have to deal with the, you know, quadruple whammy of economic downturn, lockdown, coronavirus, and shift to online retail. So I think nurturing our local neighborhoods really consciously is one way to do that. And also in terms of like the people who are worried that there may not, nobody might be there for them anymore. There's a lovely initiative that started in Wales and then has sprung around the whole of the UK. I don't know if you've heard about them, benches, where people have put little signs, happy to chat, bench. And these signs have been affixed on benches, and then people, if they sit on that bench, they're basically saying, I'm open to someone sitting on the bench and having a chat with me. And I really love that idea, because it's something kind of small, practical, that that you know, could really signal to people there is a space where you will be seen and heard, and somebody will speak to you. But then we've got to, of course, speak. And then if we see someone sitting on it, we've got to stop ourselves and speak to them, otherwise they'll feel even worse. So, yeah.
I think it's really important, Josie.
Yeah, just sorry to echo Noreena on that. I think like providing more opportunities within local areas, especially for young people, I think would be important to kind of encourage the growth and connections from a younger age would be really beneficial. But then I think as well, considering like mental health within that as well. So a lot of young people have suffered and said that their mental health has declined throughout the pandemic. The support for mental health as it isn't great anyway. Like waitlist times are ridiculously long, and it's having loneliness on top of those things, especially with the younger generations reporting to be sort of more affected by mental health conditions than previous generations have. It's just it's something that is going to turn into a crisis most likely, and there just needs to be so many more opportunities for that. So I think like Noreena was saying with the going out to the local shops, it's a lovely idea. And just sort of, I mean, it's probably not likely anytime soon, but more communal opportunities. So whether it's just like groups to learn a new skill or something, but just providing that welcoming space, and just you don't want to make it too niche is the thing. Like we need to kind of just provide far more opportunity, far more open and welcome space, and just the chance to chat. Like I think the benches, I think there was a similar idea where it's a group that you can just go to talk about anything. No one's going to judge you, but it's like strangely really really refreshing just to talk to a complete stranger and sort of not have that judgment, I guess, because it can be so difficult to talk to a family member or a friend that you've known for goodness knows how long. It's just you don't want that judgment, and I think part of that is what makes socializing so scary for a lot of people. Is the fear of the judgment. It's we're not all going to be perfect. We're not all going to say the right things the right time. And I know that I say the wrong things most of the time. But it's just, if we are able to have that openness, it's going to be so much more beneficial. The lack of judgment is more what we need to be focusing in on, and just creating those welcoming environments. And I think for a lot of people, it can be quite difficult just to listen to a conversation, no judgment. And it's like, well, you know what, if it's not your life, just kind of take a step back and just, I think, encourage the neutral position. Like there is no need to judge. It's like we're all human, we all make these mistakes, or just we all make actions. And I think at the end of that, learning to understand why this has happened and how we can sort of build on this, like connect with other people and just kind of push yourself through that. And I think that's kind of like one of the most important things, is providing the opportunities for people to connect.
Thank you, Josie. I think that's a wonderful sort of thing to end on. And I know in chat that people have already said about how can you be with people and listen without trying to fix it, and actually how can we go back to human beings and not human doings. And I think there's something very powerful about just being and listening and being there. I think I watched Eddie Izzard last night, and he talked about the golden rule, which is basically treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. And I don't think we could go far wrong. Can you all give our amazing panelists a round of applause and a big thank you? We will play out with the video from Alone, Not Alone, so Only Not Alone, so that you can see it. If you'd like to attend more of the festival, then please do. If you've enjoyed and feel inclined to donate, that's up to you. Please just give your time or a smile to somebody else today, and that will matter just as much. Gráinne, my love, are you ready with the film? Thank you so much, panel members.